What's going on? Thanks for joining me. Gonna keep chipping away at this big stack of metal zines. But what I'm gonna start off with is not a zine, but a book called The Black Candle, Volume 3, Sympathy for the Devil. So as far as I can tell, this is an anonymous author, but he is conducting like a dozen interviews with a bunch of bands, the most notable being Leviathan, Spectral Wound, Amestagon, and Der Blutarsch, that neo-folk project, and several other lesser-known names. And it's just very in-depth, interesting interviews coming from, I guess, the left-hand perspective. And interesting stuff. And I'd like to check out the other volumes of this. I guess there's at least 2 other ones. Metal Maniacs from 2003. Cannibal Corpse and Dimmu Borgir on the cover. Top albums of 2003. They didn't pull them all together, but as I said before, I was a big fan of Nathan T. Burke. And what was his album of the year? Enslaved Below the Lights. You got Funeral Mist, Revenge, Leviathan, Canate, Cursed, Aborum. You know what? On my last video, just by total coincidence, I was listening to Aborum, who, if you didn't know, are I don't think they do anything anymore, but it was a side project of Attila from Mayhem with some Italian guys, and it was a industrial black metal thing. Generally not my style, but they're an interesting band. Anyways. Zero Tolerance with Arch Enemy. That's a recent one. Zero Tolerance with Ulver. What was their album of the month? Ulver. We gave it a 5 out of 6. Crowbar. I kind of like how, at least lately, Zero Tolerance will take the big albums of the month and have all the reviewers kind of give it a quick score, even if they don't review it, and they average it out. So the number one here was Immolation, Acts of God. Metal Legion. This is, I think, a fairly... Well, it says issue 6. I was going to say a fairly long-running magazine from out of Portugal. And it's a very professional presentation. Got My Dying Bride and Midnight on the cover. It's all in English. Big review section. It reminds me a lot in feel and presentation of Terrorizer. I'm Hotep, number 11. I think I touched on this in a black metal video or something that I did. But again, this is another zine that I got through Nuclear War Now. Seems to be done in close association with them. But anyways, this is a very long one. And it is 90% in-depth interviews with Mayhem, Abigor, and Watain. So if you like those 3 bands, can't go wrong here. And this also came with the Abigor 7-inch. Recent Decibel with Soulfly. Nervosa. Carcass and At the Gates. Our album of the month here was Judas Priest Firepower, giving that an 8. I give that an 8.5 out of 10. Still a couple throwaways on there, but that album has kind of lived on the last several years as being a return to form for sure. Obituary, throwing the new album, Dying of Everything. A year without shows. I guess this was from the COVID years. Genghis Tron, 8 out of 10. Metal Maniacs from 2008 with Satyricon. Here we go. Apocalyptic Raids, that column I told you was always my favorite in here. And Slain. The gist of this seems to be that it's an American female living in Finland who put this together. And a lot of it did seem to be like concert reviews and festival recaps, which is cool, but I prefer interviews and stuff. Yeah, this was a good read, but generally just kind of the life of someone who seems to get to go to a lot of shows and stuff, and I think that's her website there, so I guess there's probably lots of photography and stories from other shows. Decibel with Holder. Bardo Methodology. There's like 8 issues of this now, and this is probably the most well-respected zine in the scene right now, I'd say. There's no ads, long interviews, extreme metal bands, authors, artists, anything interesting. Case in point, you have Wim Hof, the famous breathing guy, with a long article. Titan Blood, Necros Christos, Michael Denner, Battalion. Very interesting subjects, interesting questions, interesting answers. Can't say enough of good things about this magazine, and you can get it if you look out there. In Canada, you can get a lot of this from Temple of Mystery. I got a bunch from Hell's Headbangers. And the Bardo Methodology website has a ton of great interviews there. And I do think they try to keep some things print exclusive, but I think there's even interviews where some is on the website and then more extensive versions are in the issue. I remember several years ago, Decibel Omega gave their first interview in forever with Bardo Methodology. And if I didn't mention it, I have all the issues, and we'll get to those eventually. Awesome. Zero Tolerance from a couple years ago with Deicide. Here's a good one. This is my very first issue of Metal Maniacs ever. I did take this out for my Tiamat video, because Tiamat did spring up several times in this issue, and I always remember that. Back cover, Amorphous, Tales from a Thousand Lakes. This is when they first made their breakthrough. Machine Head, when Burn My Eyes first came out. Got Saint Vitus in here. I always remember that picture. Madball. You know, Freddy was probably a teenager at this point. And finally, Black Heart magazine. This is a Brazilian issue. Or sorry, a Brazilian magazine. This is Berthron on the cover. Profanatica. Batushka. Campfire. Speaking of Brazil, Crisian. Again, very professional, great bands. I'd love to read more. And that might be it for a couple weeks, but I'll get back to looking at more zines soon. Thanks for watching. See you next time.